The first time I realized someone had been watching me. It wasn't when I found the letter. It was when I realized he had been inside my house while I was in the shower, silently waiting for me to notice him. This happened last fall, sometime in early October. I don't remember the exact date, just that it was one of those quiet, ordinary Mondays where nothing feels out of place. Until it suddenly does. I got off work just after sunset and pulled into my driveway like I always did. Normally I park in the garage and go inside through the side door, but that evening something caught my eye on the front door. There was an envelope taped directly to the handle. That alone was strange. I wasn't expecting mail, and nobody ever left notes on my door. I parked in the driveway instead and walked up to take a closer look. My name was handwritten across the front. Not printed, not typed, written with a pen. That immediately told me this wasn't some advertisement or random flyer. Someone had taken the time to write my name by hand and leave it on my door. Inside was a short, handwritten letter. It didn't say much, but what it did say made my stomach tighten. The person claimed they'd been interested in me for some time and wanted to meet the following day at a specific place and time. Strangely enough, that day happened to be one of my days off from work. Probably just a coincidence, but it still felt unsettling. The letter wasn't signed. No name, no explanation. Just an invitation from a stranger who somehow knew where I lived and what my name was. There was absolutely no chance I was going to meet someone like that. I went inside, tore the letter into pieces, and threw it in the trash. I tried to convince myself it was probably just a prank. Maybe someone messing around, maybe a wrong house, maybe nothing. Still, the idea that a stranger knew my name and address didn't sit right with me. I tried not to dwell on it. That night passed normally. I went to bed just before 11. Since I had the next day off, I slept in and spent most of the day inside, barely doing anything productive. I honestly can't even remember what I did. Watched videos, scrolled my phone, maybe cooked something late in the evening. Around 8 or 9, I made dinner and started getting ready for bed. Upstairs, I stepped into the bathroom and turned on the shower, enjoying the hot water and finally starting to relax. That's when the doorbell rang. I froze for a second behind the curtain, confused about who would be at my door that late at night. I pulled the curtain back slightly and listened. Nothing. No second ring. No knocking. No voices. I assumed whoever it was had left and tried to relax again. But standing there in the steam, I couldn't help thinking about the letter from the day before, and how strange the timing felt. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Then I heard something else. A few light thuds, maybe soft creaks, right outside the shower curtain. My heart jumped. I shut the water off immediately and pulled the curtain open. Nothing was there. The bathroom was empty. Still, my pulse was racing now. I dried off quickly, got dressed, and decided the first thing I needed to do was check the front door. I crept downstairs and looked through the peephole. No one. I slowly opened the door. A small slip of paper fell from the crack between the door and the frame and landed on the floor. Before picking it up, I scanned the street. The neighborhood was dark and quiet. Only wind moving through the trees and distant crickets broke the silence. No cars, no people, no movement. I picked up the paper and closed the door. It was another note. Same handwriting as the first letter. As I read it, my stomach sank. Whoever wrote it was angry. The note complained about me missing the meeting earlier that day, as if they truly expected me to show up. At the bottom this time, they signed it with initials. DN. That changed everything. This wasn't a prank anymore. This felt personal, intentional, obsessive. Someone had come back to my house while I was inside. I paced around the living room for at least 30 minutes, trying to calm myself down, but the longer I stayed there, the stronger this unsettling feeling became, like someone was watching me. I checked every window, the front door, the backyard, over and over, Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I decided I'd go to the police in the morning and show them the note. I started heading upstairs. That's when I heard the same sounds again. Soft thuds, light creaks, coming from inside my bedroom. My stomach tightened as I rushed into the room. Nothing looked out of place. No movement, no open drawers, no obvious signs of anything wrong. Still, I locked the bedroom door and checked the closet, under the bed, every corner, trying to reassure myself. Then I remembered something. The bedroom had a small balcony. I rarely used it and usually forgot it was even there because I always kept the blinds closed. I pulled the blinds aside and reached toward the door. I didn't even have to touch the handle. It was already unlocked. There was no chance I'd left it that way. Before I could react, a shadow shifted outside. A figure moved from the corner of the balcony. He was standing there, watching me. And then he started moving toward the glass. For a split second, my brain couldn't even process what I was seeing. A human silhouette stood just beyond the glass, partially hidden by the darkness. I could barely make out details, only the shape of a man and the faint reflection of his face in the window. But I could feel his eyes on me. He wasn't startled. He wasn't rushing. He moved slowly, deliberately, toward the door. That was enough. I turned and sprinted out of the bedroom. Behind me, I heard the balcony door slide open. The sound snapped something primal inside me. Pure panic. I flew down the stairs, barely touching the steps, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I didn't even stop to grab my keys or phone. I ran straight out of the front door and toward the nearest neighbor I knew would answer. I could hear movement behind me at first. Footsteps, the door shifting. But I didn't dare look back. All I cared about was distance. I slammed my fist against my neighbor's door, shouting for help until the lights flicked on inside. They opened the door just enough to see my face, soaked in sweat, shaking, barely able to speak, and immediately pulled me inside. Police were called. Within 10 minutes, squad cars filled the street with flashing lights. Officers swept my house, the yard, the surrounding area. They found nothing. No man, no footprints, no forced entry, except for the balcony door, which was wide open. As we pieced together the timeline, everything started to make horrifying sense. The man must have broken in while I was in the shower. The noises I heard earlier, the soft thuds, the creaks, were likely him opening and closing the balcony door, moving in and out while I stood just a few feet away behind the curtain. Later, when I was pacing around downstairs, feeling like I was being watched, he probably was still inside the house, watching me, waiting. That realization made my skin crawl in a way I can't properly describe. What unsettled me the most, though, was something I hadn't expected. When I saw him on the balcony, just for a second, his face felt strangely familiar. Not someone I knew personally, but someone I had seen before. Maybe passing in a grocery store. Maybe walking by on the sidewalk. Maybe standing in line somewhere months ago. Just a face that had existed somewhere in my memory. The idea that a completely random, forgettable encounter could grow into this kind of obsession terrified me more than anything else. It meant this could happen to anyone. A stranger could notice you once and decide that's enough. It's been almost a year since that night. No more notes, no more letters, no strange sounds, no sightings. But I still double-check every lock. I still close my blinds at night. I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder when I walk to my car. Because somewhere out there is a man who knows where I used to live, who watched me inside my own home, and who disappeared without a trace. And I'll probably never know how close I really came to something far worse. Story 2. The moment I realized the same car had followed me off the highway into a completely empty rest stop, I knew this wasn't coincidence anymore. This wasn't some drunk driver being weird. Someone had chosen me, and whatever he wanted, he wasn't planning to let me leave. I was driving from Los Angeles all the way back to the East Coast. I'd flown out for a friend's wedding and ended up staying over a week longer than planned. Because of that, I only had 4 days to make the entire drive back before my next shift at work. I was pushing myself way harder than I should have. Long hours, short breaks, bad sleep. By the time this happened, it was already after 1 a.m. My eyes burned. My eyelids felt like they weighed 100 pounds. The only caffeine I'd had was a lukewarm gas station coffee from 3 hours earlier. The road around me was dead. Nothing but endless black highway, trees disappearing into darkness on both sides, and the occasional car blasting past before vanishing into the distance. I was fighting to stay awake. That's when I noticed headlights behind me again. They weren't bright like modern LEDs. Dim, yellowish. Old headlights. The car was moving slower than most of the traffic and took an unusually long time to catch up. After sitting behind me for about a minute, it merged into the left lane to pass. At least, that's what I thought. But it didn't pass. I glanced to my left. The car was matching my speed perfectly, riding right beside me. An old, dusty, dark red sedan. The passenger window was rolled down. Inside, I could clearly see a man driving, and he was staring directly at me. My window was still up, so I wasn't even sure he could see my face clearly in the dark. But he was looking straight at my window as if he could. His interior light was on, lighting up his face. His eyes looked bloodshot. His movements were sloppy, twitchy. He looked drunk, or worse. He didn't look away. He didn't smile. He just stared. A chill ran through me. I slowed down slightly. He slowed down too. I slowed even more. He matched it again. Finally, I slowed down absurdly, dropping all the way to around 25 miles per hour on the highway. That finally broke the pattern. He kept his speed and continued forward, disappearing into the darkness ahead of me. My heart was pounding. I tried to convince myself he was just some creep, maybe drunk, maybe messing around. Still, something about the way he stared made my skin crawl. Only a few minutes later, exhaustion started crashing back over me. My vision blurred. My head dipped. I knew I needed caffeine, and probably a real break. About 15 minutes down the road, I spotted a tiny rest stop and pulled off the highway. It was barely anything, a bathroom building and a vending-style coffee machine. No lights, no cars, no people. I parked and walked over to the machine, pouring myself a fresh cup and hoping it would wake me up enough to keep going. As I walked back toward my car, another vehicle pulled into the lot. My stomach dropped. It was the same dark red car. There was no logical way he should have been behind me again. I hadn't passed him. There were no exits between where we'd separated and this rest stop. For him to end up here, he would have had to pull off the highway somewhere hidden and wait for me to drive past. That realization sent a wave of cold fear through me. I got into my car and checked my mirrors. He didn't park behind me. He pulled up right beside me, exactly like before. I could feel his eyes on me even before I looked. When I turned my head, he was staring straight at me again. Those same red, hollow eyes locked onto mine. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. What did this guy want? I started my engine, ready to leave. That's when he began yelling something through his open window. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but he was trying to get my attention. Then he reached across his seat, opened his passenger door, and gestured for me to get in. He smiled. Not friendly, not normal, forced, too wide, too deliberate. My stomach twisted. I hit the gas. As I pulled away, I glanced over one last time and saw his expression drop instantly into a blank, dead stare. He followed me back onto the highway. This time, he became aggressive. He kept pulling alongside me, trying to match my speed again. I sped up. He sped up. I slowed. He slowed. He started drifting closer to my lane, forcing me toward the shoulder. At one point, I swear he tried to bump my rear quarter panel, like he was trying to spin me out. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I scanned the road desperately for an escape. Then I saw it. One of those emergency U-turn cut-throughs in the median that allow emergency vehicles to flip directions. Without thinking, I swerved hard into it. Illegal, dangerous, stupid. But it worked. I shot onto the opposite side of the highway and floored it in the other direction. In my mirror, I saw his brake lights flash for a second. Hesitation. Then he kept driving forward, fading into the darkness. I didn't slow down for a long time. Eventually, I found a gas station and pulled in, sitting there shaking for nearly an hour before I trusted myself to continue. I even called in a tip to the police about a possible drunk driver driving dangerously, though nothing seemed to come of it. 4 days later, after I'd made it safely home, curiosity got the better of me. I searched local news about accidents or drunk drivers on that stretch of highway. What I found made my blood run cold. The day before I had left Los Angeles, someone had disappeared on that exact road. Their car had been found abandoned in the grass off the highway. The driver was gone. No signs of a crash, no body, no explanation. The only witness mentioned seeing a rusty red car driving aggressively around the victim's vehicle shortly before it was found abandoned. It felt like reading my own experience. The same behavior, the same car, the same road. The only difference was that I made it out alive. Sometimes I think about how close I came to becoming another missing person, just another empty car on the side of a dark highway. Story 3. The first time I noticed the footprints outside my cabin, I convinced myself they didn't matter. The second time, I told myself it was probably a hiker or someone who got lost in the storm. By the third time, I realized someone had been coming to my cabin and watching it. I just didn't realize he'd already decided to come inside. This past winter, I rented a cabin in the northeast part of Washington state for a week. It wasn't a summer vacation cabin. It was built specifically for winter stays. Thick insulation, heavy fireplace, surrounded by mountains and forest that most people couldn't access during the colder months. The kind of place you go when you want silence, isolation, and snow-covered scenery. When I arrived, the ground was still clear, but when I woke up the next morning, snow had already started falling. Not light flurries, steady snowfall, enough to make the world outside disappear into a white blur. It kept me inside most of the day, sitting by the fireplace, reading, eating simple meals, enjoying the quiet. By around 9 p.m., I started getting tired and decided to go to bed. Before I did, I remembered I'd left a bag in my car the night before. I threw on my jacket and boots and opened the front door. That's when I noticed the snow on the porch was disturbed. Not blown by wind, not melted, pressed down. As I stepped out further, the shapes became clear. Footprints. Deep boot prints pressed into the fresh snow, leading across the porch. I followed them with my eyes. They came from the direction of the trees and disappeared back into the woods. I hadn't heard anyone approach the cabin. No knocking, no footsteps, nothing. I stood there for a moment, scanning the tree line, feeling a strange tightness in my chest. Whoever had been there hadn't announced themselves. They hadn't needed anything from me. They had just been standing there, watching. I grabbed the bag from my car and went back inside, locking the door behind me. Since there was no note, no knock, and no message from the rental company, I convinced myself it was probably nothing important. Maybe someone had wandered too close in the storm. I went to bed. Over the next 2 days, the snow kept falling. I stayed inside almost the entire time, letting the fireplace heat the cabin while the world outside slowly disappeared under layers of white. But every time I checked the porch, I saw them again. Fresh footprints, always the same pattern. Coming up to the porch, stopping, turning around, leading back toward the same section of woods. It happened more than once. By the third day, curiosity started outweighing caution. I bundled up in my heaviest jacket and decided to follow the general direction of the tracks to see if there was a trail, a road, maybe another cabin nearby. But the snowfall had already buried most of the prints. Once I stepped into the trees, everything looked identical. Endless white, identical trunks, no landmarks, no paths. And as my own tracks began disappearing behind me, reality set in. If I kept going, I could easily get lost. There was nothing out there anyway. No structures, no trails, no signs of civilization. I turned back. Strangely, after that, no new footprints appeared that entire day. It almost felt like whoever had been coming to the porch knew I was looking for them, and backed off. At least, that's what I hoped. That night was quiet. The cabin creaked softly as the fire crackled and the wind pushed snow against the walls. I stayed up late, finally going to bed around midnight. I slept deeply for a while. When I woke up, the cabin was dark and silent. My body felt heavy and slow, the kind of deep sleep where you wake up disoriented. I guessed it was around 3 a.m. The wind still whispered outside, the snow still fell, but there was another sound. Crunch, pause, crunch. Slow footsteps in snow. They were extremely slow, deliberate, barely loud enough to notice. If I hadn't already been thinking about the footprints from earlier days, I might have dismissed it as shifting ice or wind. But I knew exactly what it was. Someone was walking outside my cabin. I sat up in bed, listening. Strangely, I wasn't panicking yet. Nervous, yes, but calm. I even felt slightly overconfident, telling myself I could handle whatever this was. That confidence didn't last long. The footsteps stopped somewhere near the back of the cabin, near the wall where the fireplace was. After a few minutes of silence, I got out of bed. The hallway outside my bedroom had no built-in lighting. When I stepped out, it was completely black, a long tunnel of darkness stretching toward the living room. And suddenly, every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong, not just outside, inside. My skin prickled. My chest tightened. That fake confidence evaporated instantly. I took a few careful steps forward. Nothing. No sound. I reached the end of the hallway near the kitchen and living room. Just as I turned slightly toward the front door, a loud thump exploded behind me. I spun around. For just a split second, I saw movement in the darkness. A human shape rushing through the hallway toward me. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted straight for the front door, grabbed my keys off the hook, and bolted outside barefoot into the snow. The cold burned my feet instantly, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. I jumped into my car. The windshield was completely buried in snow. I couldn't see anything in front of me. I had no idea if he was running toward the car, standing in front of it, watching me. The only visibility I had was through the rear window. I threw the car into reverse and floored it down the gravel driveway, barely keeping control. Somehow, I made it out. It took over an hour for the police to arrive. By then, snowfall had erased most of the footprints. The only clear evidence was a window near the fireplace that had been forced open. From what investigators pieced together, the man had entered through that window, moved quietly through the cabin, and headed toward the far bedroom, the only other bedroom besides mine. If he'd chosen the correct door first, I would have been trapped. Instead, pure timing saved me. Just a few seconds difference. And the outcome could have been completely different. Story 4. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a noise. It was a smell. I came home around 6:40 p.m. on a Tuesday, dropped my keys into the bowl by the door like always, and stepped into my apartment expecting the usual. Stale air, detergent, whatever was left from last night's dinner. Instead, the air smelled like cold metal and wet concrete, like a basement that had been opened for the first time in years. I stood there with my jacket half off, trying to place it. The smell wasn't strong enough to be obvious from the hallway. It was inside my unit, inside my space. I walked through the living room and kitchen and found nothing. No spilled chemicals, no damp towels, no open windows. The smell faded after a minute, like it had been carried in on someone else's clothes and then left with them. I told myself it was the building. Old pipes, weird ventilation, something normal. That's what I told myself for the next 2 weeks too, Because after that day, small things kept happening. Little details that didn't scream danger, but made my brain itch. A cabinet door that was slightly open when I knew I'd shut it. A spoon missing from the drawer that turned up in the sink later, even though I hadn't used it. The front chain lock turned at an angle, like it had been tested and then carefully put back. And once, I came home to find my bathroom fan running. I didn't leave it running. I never left it running, because the sound annoyed me. I stood in the bathroom doorway, staring at it like it had personally insulted me. Then I turned it off and tried to laugh at myself for feeling unsettled over something stupid. Here's the thing. I live alone, and I'm not dramatic. I don't jump at every creak. I don't believe every creepy story online. But I do believe in patterns, and the pattern that was forming in my apartment didn't feel accidental. So I did what anyone does when they're trying not to panic. I tried to be logical about it. I checked my windows, all locked. I checked my door, solid, deadbolt, no damage. I checked with the building manager, casual, like I wasn't worried. "Hey, has anyone been doing maintenance in my unit?" She told me no. If they had, it would be logged. "Maybe it's your neighbor," she added. "Old buildings, you know. Sounds travel." That night I sat on my couch and stared at the hallway that led to my bedroom. The apartment was small, kitchen, living room, a short hall, bedroom at the end. If someone walked in, I'd hear it. I had to. But that's what bothered me. What if I wouldn't? What if the sounds I thought were the building were something else? At 11:30 p.m., I did something I'd never done before. I pushed a chair under the doorknob. Not because it would actually stop someone, but because it would make noise. Because if the door moved, the chair would scrape the floor. I went to bed feeling ridiculous. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of a soft click. Not loud, not a bang, a click, like someone tapping a fingernail against glass. My eyes snapped open and my whole body went tight. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe right. Another click, then nothing. I lay there staring into the dark, listening so hard it felt like my ears ached. I waited for footsteps. I waited for a door to open. I waited for anything. But the apartment was silent. In the morning, I convinced myself it was a dream. A noise from outside. Pipes. A vent. Then I noticed my bedroom door. I always sleep with it cracked open. I always have. I can't stand the feeling of a fully closed room. That morning, it was shut. Not slammed shut, gently shut, like someone had taken the time to close it without making a sound. My hands went cold. I got up, walked to the door, and opened it slowly. The chair I jammed under the front doorknob was still there, exactly where I'd left it. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked wrong. That was the worst part. Because if someone had forced their way in, I'd have proof. A broken lock, a splintered frame, a mess. But this was clean, quiet, careful. Someone could have been inside my apartment and left it exactly the way they found it, except for the one small thing that told me they'd been there. My door. I didn't go to work that day. I stayed home and searched every closet, every cabinet, behind the shower curtain, under the bed. Like I was acting out a scene from a movie and hoping reality would get embarrassed and stop. Nothing. I told myself I was spiraling. Then I found the service door. I didn't even know it was there. It was in the hall outside my unit, at the end by the trash chute. A gray metal door with a sign that said, "Authorized personnel only." I'd walked past it 100 times without looking twice. But that afternoon, the smell hit me again. Cold metal, wet concrete, stronger than before. I followed it into the hallway like it was a trail, and I noticed the service door wasn't fully latched. It was shut, but not sealed. Just slightly loose. I leaned closer, staring at the seam between the door and the frame. There was a thin line of darkness, like the door had been pulled closed but never clicked into place. My stomach twisted. I looked around the hall. No one. Quiet. I placed 2 fingers on the handle and pulled. The door opened with almost no resistance. A breath of air spilled out, cold, damp, stale. Behind the door was a narrow concrete stairwell, lit by a single buzzing fluorescent light. It went down into the building. I stood there frozen, because I suddenly remembered the smell, the metal, the concrete. It wasn't coming from my unit. It was coming from here, from inside the building. I should have shut the door and walked away. Called the manager, pretended I never touched it. But curiosity is a quiet kind of danger. It doesn't scream at you. It just convinces you to take one more step. So I stepped inside. The stairwell was narrow, and the sound of the hallway vanished the moment the door shut behind me. It felt like being sealed into a different world. I walked down slowly, counting steps like that would keep me safe. At the bottom was another door, heavier, older, with chipped paint. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I pushed. It opened into the basement. The air down there was colder and smelled like rust. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Storage cages lined the walls. Everything was painted in faded industrial colors, gray, beige, dull green. And it was quiet in a way that felt wrong, not peaceful, muted, like the basement swallowed sound. I walked down the aisle between storage cages, flashlight on my phone cutting a weak cone through the dark. Halfway down, I saw something that made my mouth go dry. A chair. Not a random basement chair. A dining chair. Wooden, scratched, familiar. My chair. The exact same cheap chair from my kitchen table. It was sitting alone in the basement aisle like it had been placed there on purpose. I stared at it. And then my brain tried to do the thing it always does, find logic. Maybe it wasn't mine. Maybe lots of chairs look like that. But I knew the scrape on the left leg. I knew the little burn mark on the seat from a stupid candle years ago. It was mine. Someone had brought it down here. My heart started pounding, loud enough that I thought it might echo. I took a step toward it. Then I saw the second thing, a strip of blue painter's tape on the floor. I followed it with my eyes. There were more strips, small marks leading deeper into the basement, like a path, like someone had mapped out the building, like someone had been practicing roots. I backed up, ready to leave, and that's when I heard a sound behind me, a soft scrape, not a pipe, not a drip, a shoe sliding lightly against concrete. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught the edge of a storage cage, and a shadow moving behind it. Someone was down there with me. My brain didn't even form a sentence. It went straight to one word: run. But my legs didn't move right away, because fear is weird. It doesn't always explode. Sometimes it freezes you like a statue and forces you to watch. I kept the flashlight pointed at the storage cage. Nothing else moved. The shadow was gone. I told myself it could have been a trick of the light. My own shadow. A rat. A hanging cable shifting. Then I heard it again. Closer. A slow inhale. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a breath that wasn't mine. I spun around so fast my phone light shook, and the beam landed on the chair again. Except now there was something on it. A notebook. I hadn't seen it there before. It was a small spiral notebook, the kind you'd buy for school. It sat on the chair like it had been waiting for me. My skin crawled. My first instinct was to leave it, to get out of the basement, to pretend I never came here. But my second instinct, worse, more dangerous, was to understand. Because if someone had been inside my apartment, I needed to know how. I needed to know what they wanted. So I approached the chair, every step slow and careful like I was stepping on glass. I picked up the notebook with 2 fingers. It was damp around the edges, like it had been down here for a while. I opened it. The first page was covered in handwriting. Not a diary, not random notes, a list. Mon, 6:35, Keys Bowl, Mon, 6:42, shower fan on 3 min TU, 11:20, lights off, bedroom door cracked, DW Ed, 3:12, click test, woke, THU, 7:05, Netflix loud, headphones, free, 8:10, took trash out, door unlocked, 15 sec. I couldn't breathe. It was my schedule, my habits, my movements, tracked like an experiment. And then, on the next page, a rough drawing. It was my apartment layout. Not the building's blueprint, not generic. My unit, the kitchen, the couch, the hallway, the bedroom. And the drawing had markings, arrows showing angles of sight, little notes written beside them. Window reflection chair scrape, warning closet hinge, squeak, blind spot, blind spot. My throat tightened so hard it felt like swallowing hurt. I flipped another page. This one wasn't my apartment. It was the building, hallways, staircases, a route drawn from the service door to my unit. Then, in the margin, written neatly, no cameras, rain, sombre sea, fog. I felt sick, because it wasn't just someone wandering in by accident. This was planned, studied, practiced, and I was standing in the middle of it. The basement suddenly felt smaller, like the air got heavier. The buzzing fluorescent light above me seemed louder. The shadows between storage cages seemed deeper. And then, from somewhere behind me, a voice spoke. Quiet, calm, too close. Don't take that. My whole body jolted. I dropped the notebook like it burned. I turned, phone light shaking violently. A man stood at the end of the aisle. He was half hidden by the dim light. But I saw enough. Average height, dark jacket, a hood pulled up. His face was mostly shadow, but his posture was relaxed. Like he'd been down here 1,000 times, like this was normal, like I was the one trespassing. I just want it back, he said, almost politely. I backed away, step by step, keeping the flashlight trained on him. My mouth tried to speak. Nothing came out. He took a slow step forward, and I could hear the soft crunch of his shoes against gritty concrete. I didn't hurt you, he said, still calm. I didn't take anything important. I backed up more, searching behind me for the direction of the stairwell door. He watched me do it like it didn't bother him. That's the thing, he added, voice almost thoughtful. I never needed to rush. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it was pushing against my ribs. What do you want? I finally forced out. He paused, tilting his head slightly, as if the question surprised him. I wanted to see if you'd notice, he said. A cold shock ran through me. What? I wanted to see how long it would take, he continued. Before you stopped calling it the building. Before you stopped blaming yourself. He took another step forward. I took 2 steps back, and my heel hit something, the chair leg, my chair, the one I'd shoved under the doorknob. In my mind, I saw it, saw the scraping sound that would alert me, except I wasn't in my apartment. I was in the basement, and the chair was down here. That meant I never shoved it under my door last night. Or I had, and someone removed it. Silently, carefully, while I slept. My stomach dropped. The man's tone stayed gentle, like he was talking someone down from panic. You're doing the smart thing, he said, backing away, watching my hands. I stared at his hands. They were empty. That didn't help, because empty hands meant he didn't need a weapon to feel in control. He knew the building. He knew the exits. He knew me. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I sprinted toward the stairwell door, my phone light bouncing wildly. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Fast now, purposeful, not chasing like a movie, chasing like someone who already knew where you were going. I hit the stairwell door and shoved. It didn't open. My hands fumbled for the handle, pulling, pushing, twisting, locked. I slammed my shoulder into it. Nothing. And then I felt him behind me, close enough that the air shifted. I spun around, flashlight hitting his chest, his hood, his hands. He wasn't reaching for me. He was reaching past me, toward the notebook on the floor, like that mattered more than grabbing me. He crouched, picked it up, and stood again in one smooth motion. Then he looked at me. I finally saw part of his face. Pale skin, tired eyes, A mouth that almost smiled. "You did better than most," he said. And then the lights went out. Not my phone, the basement lights. The fluorescent buzz died instantly, plunging everything into darkness except my shaking phone beam. In the black, I heard a door open somewhere. A heavy metal door. Then close. Then silence. Like he'd vanished into the building itself. I stood there, alone, breathing too hard. Phone light trembling over concrete and pipes and storage cages. I didn't know if he was gone, or if he was simply waiting for me to move first. I don't remember getting out of that basement. I only remember pieces. My hand slipping on the stairwell rail, my foot catching on a step, my breath tearing in and out of my chest like it didn't belong to me. I remember bursting into the hallway upstairs and nearly falling into the wall because my legs felt wrong. I remember running to my unit and fumbling my keys so badly I dropped them twice. And I remember something that still makes my throat close when I think about it. My front door was already unlocked. Not cracked, not chained, unlocked. As if it had been waiting for me to come back inside. I didn't go in. I ran past my unit like it was on fire, sprinted down the hallway, hit the elevator button until my thumb hurt, and then realized the elevator would take too long. So I took the stairs. I ran out the front of the building into the cold air and kept going until I hit the street and saw the first person, an older man walking a dog. I didn't even speak properly. I just said, "Call the police, please, now." He must have seen my face, because he didn't question me. He pulled out his phone immediately. By the time the police arrived, I was shaking so hard my teeth clicked. I told them everything. The smells, the door, the chair, the notebook, the basement. 2 officers went inside with me. We walked the hallway together. They checked my unit first. Nothing, no one, no forced entry. No chair missing from my kitchen, because my chair was still there, pushed neatly under the table like always. I stared at it, confused, dizzy, like my brain couldn't compute. Then we went to the service door. It was shut, latched, locked. The officers tried it anyway. It didn't budge. One of them frowned and called for the building manager. She arrived half an hour later, irritated and sleepy, insisting nobody had access besides maintenance. She unlocked the service door with her key. The stairwell smelled like cold concrete. My stomach clenched. We went down. The basement lights were on again, buzzing like normal. The storage cages sat quietly, unchanged, and the aisle where I'd seen my chair was empty. No chair, no notebook, no tape on the floor. The officers looked at me in a way that made me feel smaller, like I was inventing this, like stress had cracked my brain open. I wanted to scream at them that I wasn't crazy, that I had held the notebook in my hands. So I did the only thing I could think of. I showed them my phone. Because my phone had been in my hand the entire time, because while I was reading the notebook, my brain, without thinking, had done what it always does when something feels important. It recorded. My camera roll wasn't open because I'd meant to film him. It was open because I'd meant to film the notebook. A shaky, low-light video of my hand flipping pages. The list, the map, the words, no cameras. Rain, lust, fog. Then the sudden sound of a voice. "Don't take that." The video jerked wildly, catching a glimpse of a dark figure at the end of the aisle. The officer watched it twice, jaw set. Then he said something that turned my blood cold. "That service door," he asked the manager. "Who else has a key?" The manager hesitated. "Maintenance," she said. "Me, the building owner, that's it." "Show me the key log," the officer said. She blinked. "We don't have a log." He didn't argue. He just nodded once. And then, without looking away from her, he asked, "Do you have any vacant units?" The manager's face shifted slightly, small, almost invisible. "Yes," she said. "One, on the 2nd floor." The officer glanced at his partner. "Let's check it." The manager tried to protest, something about needing permission, paperwork, liability. The officer cut her off. "We have a resident reporting an intruder and video proof of a person inside the basement. Open it." Reluctantly, she led us upstairs. Second floor, end of the hallway. The door to the vacant unit looked normal, clean, unmarked, new lock. The manager unlocked it. The moment the door opened, the smell hit me again. Cold metal, wet concrete, basement air. Inside, the unit wasn't empty. Not fully. There were no couches, no TV, no personal photos. But there were things. A folding table in the middle of the living room. On it, a cheap desk lamp, a notebook stack, and a printed floor plan of the building. On the far wall, taped up with neat strips, were photos. Not art, not decoration, screenshots. My social media profile picture, a photo from a friend's post, a blurry zoomed-in image of me walking into the building, and in the corner, a clear photo that made my legs go numb. My front door, taken from inside the hallway, taken close enough that you could see the scratch on the paint near the peephole. The officers moved fast after that. They called for more units. They sealed the floor. They brought in the building owner. I sat on the hallway carpet with my back against the wall, feeling like I'd left my body somewhere else. The manager stood a few feet away, pale and silent, like she was trying not to be associated with her own building. And then one officer came back from inside the vacant unit, holding something in an evidence bag. A key ring. Multiple keys. One of them had a small label on it. Service. Another was labeled with a unit number. My unit number. The officer looked at me. "This is why your door was unlocked," he said quietly. "He had keys." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because my brain was stuck on one question. How long had someone had keys to my home? How long had someone been walking in and out without forcing anything? How long had someone been close enough to learn my schedule like a routine? The officer's phone rang. He stepped aside, spoke quietly, listened, then returned with a tight expression. "We found a hidden latch," he said. "In the closet. In the vacant unit. There's access to a maintenance crawl space." My stomach turned. Because suddenly the basement made sense. The service door made sense. The smell made sense. The building wasn't just a building. It was a maze. And someone had been living in the walls of it. They never found him that night. The crawl space access led to a long maintenance corridor, old, narrow, dusty, running between units like veins. They found blankets, a flashlight, bottles of water, and a small bag of tools. But he was gone, slipped out through some other service exit, or waited until the chaos distracted everyone and moved like a shadow. After that, the building owner replaced locks, installed cameras, promised upgrades. The manager tried to reassure residents with emails full of words like safety and protocol. I moved out within the week. Here's what I can't forget. The man in the basement didn't sound angry. He didn't sound desperate. He sounded patient. Like this wasn't his first building. Like I wasn't his first person. And like the scariest part wasn't that he'd been inside my apartment. It was that he'd been close enough to study me, and still decided he wanted to see if I'd notice. Because in his notebook, on the last page of the video, there was one final line I didn't understand until later. It was written neatly, like a reminder. If they notice, change buildings. If they don't, you have time. And the most terrifying part? For 2 weeks, I didn't notice.